This is Talk is Sheep, the official podcast of the Wild Sheep Society of BC, brought to you by SITKA. Come along as we bring conversations that matter to you into the high alpine. This episode is sponsored by our conservation partner, Gunwerks. Thank you, SITKA Gear and Gunwerks, for investing in healthy wildlife and sustainable ecosystems. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is early August. We're back in the studio. And we've been hitting hard on horn aging, hunting, education, as everyone's getting ready to hit to the fields this summer, this fall. And we haven't spent a bunch of time on conservation. And there's some pretty serious issues in our wild sheep community. And this isn't a BC issue necessarily, but it does reach our borders for sure. And certainly something we need to talk about and create awareness around. And really privileged and honored today to have a good friend of mine, ardent conservationist, a man I respect greatly, currently vice president, formerly the president of the Texas Bighorn Society, director of the Wild Sheep Foundation, Sam Cunningham. Welcome to the podcast. Great to see you, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Kyle.
So first of all, I want to say something is that, you know, people look at directors and they look at people in the wild sheep world and they're like, oh yeah, that'd be great. I get to have my title. It says director and I get to sit at the fancy table and I get all these privileges and it's amazing. What I will say is Friday night, it's 6:45 in Texas and you're working for free. So, there's maybe some perks of being a director and a volunteer and getting involved in the wild sheep family. But I can tell you to our listeners is that we are a passionate group of people, and the volunteers and the people that care about wild sheep. And don't get me wrong, it's not just directors; it's much bigger than that. But our directors, whether it be at the national level, at your club level, whether it be a chapter affiliate, are dedicated, hardworking individuals. And Sam, you're a doctor by profession. You're a busy guy. Quite often, you show up in your smock and your gear at these meetings and really dedicated. And I know I know that when you sit in on a meeting, it's costing Sam Cunningham money. So it's really cool. Sam, I've got a lot of respect for you. And I really, really appreciate it. And again, just amazing. Here we are on a Friday night, you carrying the torch for conservation.
Thanks, Kyle. You talk about being a director and the perks and the downsides and all that. It's being involved with Wild Sheep Foundation, just as a member, when I joined as a member and then quickly elevated to a life member and on up the ranks from there, I did that because it's just very rewarding. And the people listening in, they get that. They're pretty serious about sheep also, probably more so than most. But they understand the reward that comes along with it. And it's worth every minute.
I guess, Sam, that's a question for you is that, you are a busy guy. Like, some people get involved. They have a little bit of time. Sometimes there's people retired or maybe they're involved, but they're not involved at the level that you are, where you're literally putting in hours and hours and hours daily, certainly weekly, but often daily. What motivated you to step up to this level? Like, because, you could donate, which you do that. You're at the highest level of Marco Polo Society and all that sort of business. So there's the time, talent, treasure, and you give your time and your talent, which arguably that maybe is the most important. Some people would argue otherwise, but very, very critical. And you do all three. So what drives you to do that, Sam?
Well, I don't have a whole lot of talent, so I can donate time. I guess the wild sheep world, it's like no other conservation group there is. And I'm involved in a lot of other conservation groups, but the sheep that just kind of brings it home every time, and seeing where they were historically and then where they went and kind of where they are now. And it's not ever, okay, we solved the problem, move on. As you know, and your listeners know, it's an everyday grind. There's always something going on. There's always some sort of issue, and it's work, but like I said earlier, it's probably the most rewarding work there is, conservation-wise. And you get to work with all the sheep folks, all the Wild Sheep Foundation members, the board members, the agency people at the state and federal level, the jurisdictions in Canada, all the chapters and affiliates. When I got on the board, you had to be on a committee. Uh, I really like being on the chapter and affiliates committee because you get to be around the people that are doing the work, basically. I mean, everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction, but those chapter and affiliate people are, I mean, they're just they kind of take it to another level.
Awesome. Well, Sam, you kind of came through that network, like you obviously heavily involved with the Texas Bighorn Society, and you were president there for I think you joke about a life sentence as the president there, and you just got out of jail free card there when Clay stepped up as president this year, which is he's going to be Clay's done so much for bighorns in Texas as well. So I'm really excited and then you're still on the board there too, but. What I'd like to talk about is let's start off with the positives because there's some really cool things that you guys have done in Texas here. And we just had you on the podcast to talk about it. But for those that haven't listened to that podcast, and we did one earlier, which I encourage people to go back on with Sam. But tell us a little bit about some of the successes and what you guys got going on here in the last year in Texas.
Uh, Kind of the big success historically, desert bighorn sheep were native to Texas, and then by 1960 they were completely extirpated. And so the Texas Bighorn Society was formed in 1981. The state agency reached out to actually a trauma surgeon in Houston, Dr. Red Duke, and said, "Hey, you need to find some like-minded individuals and help us." And so Texas Bighorn Society was formed. They had tried to do some relocations into Texas. None of them worked very well. And then when Texas Bighorn Society was formed and when working with Parks and Wildlife, started that reintroduction process. And it just, and you mentioned Clay Brewer, he was no small part of that. There wouldn't be sheep in Texas today if it wasn't for Clay. And those numbers got back up to to historic numbers, between 1,200 and 1,500 sheep. And so in Texas, we were kind of like, yeah, well, there we go. And then you start hearing about all these states and provinces that have die-offs from disease and exposure from domestic sheep. And honestly, Texas was a little bit like, yeah, we don't have that problem. Like I said, and then until we did, and then we started having some big die-offs, 4 or 5 years ago. So we went from 12 or 1,500 to absolute zero, and then brought sheep in from Arizona and Nevada back up to 1,200-ish. And then we started having our disease outbreak with mycoplasmoid pneumonia. And most of the people on this that listen to this podcast, they know what that is. And it's usually exposure from domestic sheep in most places. Well, in Texas, down in our Trans-Pecos area, we don't have any domestic production, but we have aoudad. And so the aoudad have started it started being a problem and transmitting disease from the sheep. So we went 1,200 to zero, back to 1,200, and 4 years ago, we had about 1,200 sheep. 2 years ago, or 3 years, 4 years ago, we had 1,200 sheep. 3 years ago, we had about 800. 2 years ago, we had 400-ish. So just in a few short years, we've dropped our population by at least 50%, probably closer to 75. So that was a big issue. One of the more recent successes, if you look at that and you think, how can you spin anything good out of that? There's a wildlife management area in Texas called Elephant Mountain, and that's been our brood area. And so when Elephant Mountain gets to carrying capacity, then we would take sheep off of that and translocate them to different ranges, and that's how we populated all those ranges through the metapopulation and all the adjacent ranges in Texas. And that worked great for a while. And now with this die-off and all those numbers dropping, and aoudad spreading disease as well as really being hard on habitat, it's not a matter of if, but when aoudad get onto Elephant Mountain. And when the fox is in the hen house, then we got a big problem. So what we did December of last year, sponsored generously through Wild Sheep Foundation grant and aid process. We got funded for a translocation. We took 77 sheep off of Elephant Mountain, brought them down, tested them, collared them, ear tagged them, took all the samples and put them in trailers. Sent that off, had a private jet, flew those samples overnight to Wattle for testing. And the next morning, we were going to put these sheep in the Franklin Mountains, which is near El Paso, which is almost 300 miles away from Elephant Mountain. So started the trailers rolling, waiting for the word to come in, and if they come back and any of that's positive, we just have to turn the trailers around and go back. Well, we were starting out, we weren't even quite halfway, got the call that all those sheep were clean. So we took 77 sheep. There were 40 ewes and 37 rams, and took those over to Franklin Mountain State Park, and it is literally that. We pulled the trailers up, pulled up into a picnic area, backed it up to the picnic table, opened the gate, and started releasing them. And they ran past the picnic tables and straight up into the mountains. When we got there to Franklin Mountain State Park, there was probably 800 people just there to see the sheep released. So that was a pretty cool thing to see that. Of those ewes that were moved over there, I think 80% of them were pregnant. And so this year we have a lamb crop, and we've had, I think survivability is like 45% on our lamb crop. So we've got 16 or 18 new lambs popping around on Franklin Mountains. Franklin Mountains historically were sheep habitat, but because it's surrounded on three sides by the city of El Paso, it kind of lost some favorability because it's like, well, there's no natural expansion for those sheep outside that park to other ranges. So kind of looking at that, needing a place to put sheep, that worked out great because one, it's a state park, so it's completely devoid of aoudad, and two, if the sheep can't get out, the thinking was, well, the aoudad probably have a hard time getting in, and so that's why the area was chosen.
Sam, what do you guys think the carrying capacity is of the Franklin Mountain? Like, any idea how many sheep it could hold?
Yeah, we had a meeting Wednesday, and talking to Froilan Hernandez, our bighorn sheep team leader. The original estimate was about 200 if they utilize that whole range. And of the ones we've released, they kind of like that southern end of that range a little better for whatever reason. We've got water and everything on both ends, and if they use the whole range, he said, roughly 200 sheep. But if they're just all hanging in the south end, then it'll decrease that by some for sure.
You just mentioned something that tweaked my brain, but you said the water on both ends. I believe you guys did a water guzzler project in there too to get water set up and make sure that they had proper hydration as well.
Yes, sir. In there's some natural springs, and most of it's seasonal. There's one that you can kind of call year round, but it's not completely dependable. And so again, going back to the chapter and affiliates and everybody rowing the boat the same direction, we had a lot of the chapters and affiliates donate to our water project, and we put 2 guzzlers on the tops of those mountains and on the top of the mountain in the Franklin Mountain State Park.
Yeah, pretty cool story about collaboration. Out of curiosity, what would you say that transplant costs? Like, if you had to throw a number out there, what kind of number are we talking to move those sheep?
All in, I'd say 400,000 to 500,000.
Awesome. Yeah, crazy. And then, so obviously, Wild Sheep Foundation there was a huge grant need through them, and support from chapter and affiliates, some chapter and affiliates, and then TP, Texas Park and Wildlife, of course, and then Texas Bighorn Society. I think there were some other donors too. There was somebody in New York and something like that as well.
Yeah. There was a group in Connecticut, and a couple of those guys came down for the translocation, and all of that you know, Kevin Hurley and Corey Mason, when they do the GIA, man, they can really hustle dollars. And so you put in for a GIA, and they look at that and go, oh, we need X amount of dollars. So they start making phone calls and, hey, we need money, to potential donors. And private industry, as well as some other NGOs, really stepped up big for us.
Very cool. Yeah, that's an awesome story. So now, so of course you talked about Elephant Mountain, which was a source herd, which had clean sheep, but you're worried about Aoudad getting on that mountain and infecting them. And then you've got the Franklin herd. Will the Franklin herd as well be used for a potential further translocation? Are there other areas in Texas that you feel like you could safely transplant now? Are they like eligible now, or is it a problem with disease that you just couldn't do anything in the current situation?
2 years ago, or last year, 2 years ago, Parks and Wildlife did just an Aoudad survey, just strictly Aoudad, and there were Aoudad in every mountain range in Texas down there. So they landed and tested, and on every mountain range, which had Aoudad, which was 100%, every mountain range tested positive for MOV. Prevalence as high as 86% in one range. So everywhere had MOV and Aoudad. So that's kind of and so pulling things off, and it's like, where do we put them? We've even had other states, looking to say, hey, we're having a horrible drought. Can you guys take some sheep? Yeah, we would love sheep, but where are we going to put them was kind of the question. And we've been working with some of that, and we've got that sort of lined out. So if that comes up again, we've got some areas that will be ready for translocation from another state if that happens, or the Franklins or Elephant Mountain reaches carrying capacity. We've got some places we can go.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously the crux of this problem is it's a disease issue and it's tied to Aoudad. And so we kind of touched on this before, and I think the Aoudad issue is kind of a little bit known. But there's also habitat loss, which we know as well. And I really want to do a deep dive today about this issue with Aoudad and get an understanding, because it's pretty popular. Guys love to go Aoudad hunting. They think, oh, it's awesome. And I think most people, I certainly did back in the day, would be like, oh, I'm going to contribute to, the depopulation of Aoudad. I'll go take my Aoudad off the landscape. But I've learned from you that is certainly not the case. We're doing more harm than good. So I really want to do a deep dive on the issue, why it's important. And then, what are some of the strategies? What can we do? Because so let's do the deep dive. And so let's start with maybe start with the history of bringing in Aoudad. So they're obviously an invasive species. What's the history of Aoudad in Texas? When were they introduced? And sort of talk about the numbers and why they're such a problem.
They're an invasive exotic species. They were brought in to the United States after the war. There was to a place in California. That guy had a big exotic ranch. When he passed away, they just dropped the fences. Then there was a rancher in New Mexico that he went out and got a bunch of Aoudad and brought them to New Mexico. And then the way they got to Texas was actually through Parks and Wildlife. They brought in like 10 or 12 and put them up here by me in Amarillo and Paladera Canyon, and then another 12 to 15 and put down in the Trans-Pecos, thinking, okay, they would serve as an extra, huntable species, maybe protein source for some folks. And so that's how it started. And then it's just kind of spread like a grass fire.
So those initial numbers were there in the early days. And one of the things I've learned again through you that Aoudad have incredible fecundity, that they're like 2, 3, they got 160-day gestation, something like a fairly short, and multiple births, and the numbers just like they're incredibly resilient on the landscape. So, what are we talking population wise? What sort of numbers are we at today? Like just a frame of reference, how many?
Yeah, we started from, like I said, 15 total animals in 1960. And like you were talking about, those Aoudad, the females, they're sexually mature and can start reproducing at 9 months of age.
Oh, wow.
Most of the time they breed twice a year. And when they deliver, they usually have twins. So you can see it's not a linear, but it's a logarithmic expansion. Looking at, we funded some research that they looked at, kind of using similar models to what population dynamic models that were used for feral pig expansion. And sort of the crux of that came out was, in order to keep the aoudad numbers at a steady state, not letting them increase, but not dropping them any either, just keeping them right where they are, you have to kill 80% of the ewes every year. And so back when they were 15, that's probably not a problem. 4 years ago, we had, like I said, 1,200 desert bighorn sheep and about 20 to 25,000 aoudad 4 years ago. Currently, we have about 400 desert bighorn sheep and over 100,000 aoudad.
Oh my God!
So that's the kind of math you're dealing with. And so if you say, just going to make the math easy, 100,000, half of them females, so 50,000, 80%. Nobody's killing 40,000 females a year. They're not killing 40,000 total a year.
Wow. Okay.
Get that logarithmic phase of that growth curve, and it's just going.
That's crazy. So, so let's talk a little bit more about the problem. So there's obviously a disease issue, but there's a habitat loss issue too. So let's talk a little bit about, and then on that same note, let's talk a little bit about private lands in Texas and the challenge that we have there with that dynamic as well.
Okay. We have always said, well, aoudad spread disease and they're hard on the habitat. Well, we had data to back up the disease part. You could take pictures on foot surveys and say, see. Then Justin French and his group at Sul Ross University, they actually did an aoudad study on a mountain range down there and surveyed and counted aoudad. And then they spent 90 hours of flight time and they killed 7,553 aoudad or something like that. So they dropped that population by like 70% just immediately. And then 5 months later, resurveyed it, and that population was already back up like 1,300 aoudad or so. Just within 5 months. So part of that was they had a second birthing season, and a lot of it was immigration from surrounding mountain ranges. What they did when they took all of those aoudad off of there, they kind of looked at it and use the NRCS method of like animal unit equivalencies or whatever, and they estimated using that model that by removing those 5,773 aoudad, that's what they removed, was 5,773, and dropped it 73%, that they saved what'd they say, like 19.4 million pounds of forage, which was like 9,000 something tons of forage just by taking those aoudad off of that one range.
Do you have these facts and figures memorized?
I've been over them a few times, yes, sir.
That's okay. I shouldn't laugh. It's not a laughing. Okay, yeah, you got a little cheat sheet there. Good. I'm glad to hear that.
I didn't have it open when we started talking about this, but I opened it up. It's actually the publication from Justin French and those folks at Borderlands Research and Sul Ross.
Okay, so we've got an incredible reproductive and growth rate for these animals on the landscape. We've got a disease issue. We've got a habitat loss issue. Now, one of the things that I understand is a challenge is that we have outfitters selling hunts, which are obviously a huge revenue source. And so that there's a motivation for them to have the resource on their land so they can sell these hunts to outfit them. But then there's an issue with private land. Like, what do you do with the private land scenario? Texas is a private land. Would you say 70% private land or something in Texas, or it's a huge number?
93 to 97% private land.
Oh yeah, it's huge, right? So that's a challenge. If we have an issue in BC and we need to do some depredation, for example, on wolves, it's all public land. It's all crown land or whatever you want to call it now. So yeah, easy peasy. As long as you get approvals from government, you're good to go. But that's not the case in Texas. So you have all these private property, so you have to have, there's that issue to work. But from what I'm understanding now, Sam, is landowners are starting to have issues because they're guys that are ranching, that sort of stuff, they're losing all this. They have no place for it's being overrun by Aoudad and they can't feed their own animals.
Right. The WMAs, the wildlife management areas in Texas, the state Parks and Wildlife Department, they have been hammering Aoudad in those WMAs. We talked about Elephant Mountain. That one particularly gets surveyed and Aoudad removed like weekly. They've got a bunch of cameras. Anytime they see one, they go out and dispatch it. Last August, so just a few months before we did the translocation in December, there were 10 Aoudad got into Elephant Mountain. So they removed them and tested them, and 7 of them tested positive for MOB.
Wow.
So it's not like I said, it's not a matter of if, but when. And so the state, like you said, great, we can do that. We can do Aoudad control in other places. The landowners, they make good money off of those Aoudad hunts, and nobody's begrudging anybody to make a living. A lot of them are coming and saying, hey, take away the disease aspect, and coming in and saying, man, those things are just eating me out of house and home. We had a symposium down here, and there was one landowner that said they were talking about going over these figures with with the habitat and losing forage and everything. He said, yeah, I finally got some rain in my country. And he said, it rained up on the top of my mountain. He said, I had mudslides at the bottom because there wasn't any vegetation to soak it up. And it was just, erosion and washing off, all the landscape basically. And so that, and like you touched on livestock, there's a lot of cattle grazers in that area. They're kind of over the whole Aoudad issue as well. Like I said, those landowners, some of them make a lot of money off of Aoudad hunts, and nobody's begrudging them, but you can see those numbers and that expansion, and you can tell, they spent 90 hours and killed 5,773 Aoudad. That was an Aoudad a minute, basically. Well, nobody's doing that. So and you have to kill 40,000 females a year. That's not happening. So this is obviously not a problem we're going to hunt our way out of.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Nobody down here is, like I said, is telling anybody you can't hunt Aoudad. Kyle, you can't come down here and hunt Aoudad. You can't sell an Aoudad hunt, whatever. It's just like, hey, this is what's going on.
Yeah. So it seems like there might be some likely allies there on this issue, right? So there's, like you said, there's obviously some ranchers that are going to be affected negatively, probably the guys that aren't selling Aoudad hunts, obviously. There's got to be other conservation orgs that have this similar concerns as us. Is anyone, you had the symposium. What kind of collaborators were down there in discussing this issue, Sam?
Biologists from a lot of different states, obviously from Texas, landowners from Texas, NGOs. It was a good mix. And now, some landowners have a zero tolerance for Aoudad. They see an Aoudad, they dispatch out there and it's removed, like right then. There's some ranches that fly their country weekly or bi-weekly just for Aoudad control. As you can imagine, that's not a cheap undertaking. So the amount of landowners that can do that, it's not everyone, I guess is a good way to say it. Also, there's landowners that say, hey, I live over here and I'm selling hunts over here. Your sheep problem is over there. Why does that affect? Why should I worry about it? And we've done tons of collaring studies, and those Aoudad travel as far or farther than desert bighorn sheep. And so it's an issue. with the travel and disease exposure that one.
Well, and I would imagine that if you have a significant herd of aoudad, is a flock or herd, a significant amount of.
You know what it's really called? It's called an anger of audad. How funny is that?
Is that right? Okay, so you got the anger of aoudad, and you, and if they're in any numbers and they're in an area, they're obviously going to be grazing heavily. Well, if there's an area where there's not as many aoudad or there's better forage, they're going to move over there, obviously, right? So that's the issue. They're just going to move around, especially with that growth. It's crazy.
Lalo Gonzalez, he was at Solros also back when he was working on his master's, and he did some studies and showed collared aoudad and bighorn sheep, and looked at it in the areas that were part of his study. The aoudad just came in and took over the prime habitat and displaced the desert bighorn sheep into lesser habitat until the prime stuff was gone, and then they moved over and displaced them out of the lesser habitat too.
Mm-hmm. So what's the solution then, Sam? You mentioned the symposium. Did you guys come up with some like a plan or solutions or ideas? How do we move forward with this?
It was kind of nice because a lot of landowners, state agency folks, and everybody was saying I guess the best summary at the end of it was there's a bighorn sheep or aoudad. Pick one because you can't have both very much longer. And so that kind of raised a lot of eyebrows. And landowners were using terms like zero tolerance and eradication and like getting serious about it. And so one of the things that Parks and Wildlife's been doing on the WMAs, flying those, doing aerial gunning, also using corral traps. So big, huge corrals, you bait them with alfalfa or whatever, and open the gate, and then there's a remote camera. There's a camera so you can monitor it, from your office, wherever. And once enough aoudad get in there, you can remotely drop that gate. And then once that gate's dropped, dispatch your technicians out there to remove the animals. So those two methods have so far been the most effective of removing big numbers of aoudad in a short amount of time.
What, 40,000? You gonna do that? 40? Like I can think of this like 40,000 rounds, if you're gonna shoot them, that's insane.
Ammo.
Wow, it's a good thing it's Texas because there's some ammo down there.
And, you start looking at the scale of this, and it's just like, holy cow. One thing that has come up recently in our last state legislature here in Texas, back, in the past, there was a bill called the Pork Chopper Bill. It was House or Senate Bill 1245, whatever I think it was. And back then it was passed and made it legal to do depredation of feral pigs from helicopters commercially. So you can get on the internet and Google heli hog hunting in Texas, and there's a whole list of companies that you can go down, pay your money. They'll put you in a helicopter with an AR, and you go out and fly around and smoke pigs from the helicopter for however many hours you want to pay for. Back in this last session, aoudad got added to that list. They added some verbiage in there and made that okay for aoudad. That's supposed to roll out the first of next month. We'll see if it makes that. The state Parks and Wildlife, they've done some requests for general comments and things like that because they're trying to see how that looks, and how they keep saying it has to fit with the federal model of depredation. And so hopefully there'll be some way that landowners can make money off of that.
Mm-hmm.
Think about
okay,
it.
so
selling aoudad $7,500. That's a 3-day hunt. You'll probably kill your aoudad on first or second day. Or you can go and fly in a helicopter, a half a day for 3 days and make more money and take out a whole lot more aoudad.
Yeah. So when we start looking at the numbers and you talk about 40,000 females to be removed, just for the status quo, like we're not even talking about decreasing the numbers, which we obviously, it sounds to me like there's already too many aoudad. But if we're just doing the status quo, so what's the solution? Because it sounds to me like even aerial gunning, corral trapping, that's not going to move the needle. Like unless the guys are out there doing that daily, Monday to Friday, sort of 8 hours a day, 7 days or 7 days a week, they're not going to get the job done.
Well, that's true. It's a big, like you said, it's a big ask, and it's not a hey, we're going to do this for a month. I mean, it's a from now on problem. Those corral traps that I talked about, you know, you can get big ones or whatever, but they're portable. So you put it in an area, and if the animals get acclimated to it, then you can take it down and move it to another area pretty easily. The Parks and Wildlife guys, they've got a couple that they're using. Believe it or not, some of the private landowners have said, hey, can we borrow that and put it on my place? Sure. And so you can move it around. We Texas Bighorn Society just submitted another GIA to get a couple more corral traps from Wild Sheep Foundation, and then Texas Bighorn Society's committed to 2. So we'll go from 2 to 6, hopefully soon. And what we will do is TBS, you know, we'll pay for the helicopter to get them to the mountaintops, just like we do with our guzzlers, and put them up there.
Yeah.
So that's not an either or, but anything you can think about. And, you know, we're not saying hunting aoudad is not gonna, it doesn't help. I mean, anytime you can take at least one off, that helps, but they're not going out there and just shooting you or this or that, you know. They're very selective in what they shoot, because you don't want to, nobody wants to pay $7,000 and go out there and shoot a lamb or a ewe. They, you know, they want the big trophy.
Well, that's just it, right? You remove the male, it removes one off the landscape. At least if you take a female, you're probably removing 3 off the landscape. So at least it's a start, but it's not helping anything, because that male's, you know, there's going to be another male breeding ewes, and it's just going to be the same thing. So it's really not helping at all.
Kind of other crazy things, just since you were asking about what else, some of the other just crazy outside the box things that people have looked at is trying to create, to try to monetize those aoudad. And so at one point there were some talks with a dog food company. Hey, can we bring you 40,000 aoudad carcasses for dog food? And there was some talks about that, and that kind of fell by the wayside. There was actually one lady, I think she's in Wyoming, wanted an aoudad hide. I said, the short part, the long part, all of it. She's a custom hat maker. She makes felt hats. And so she was wanting to use that hair off an aoudad to make a felt hat. And I sent her some stuff, but I don't know how that turned out. So
yeah, it's interesting. Like you look at the buffalo, right? Like what happened, you know, back in the Teddy Roosevelt days, where, you know, they were using buffalo for the weirdest stuff. Like they were using the bones for things, and you know, like birds, like the extirpation of so many different bird species because they were feather hats back in Europe or back in New York or whatever. Let's find something like that for aoudad, for crying out loud.
Another approach that has been kicked around some and is gaining some traction is when you do these aoudad traps and you drop the gate, you go in there and you kill every one of them except for the most dominant male. And then you put a collar on him, and then you vasectomize him. Huh. If you just castrate him, now his drive to reproduce is gone, and he just kind of follows along. But if you vasectomize him, he still has the drive to breed. He just can't get it done. And so you put that collar on him and let him go. And now that kind of serves as like a Judas ram, because he'll run and hook up with the next big herd and try to breed them. And he's not able to. And he still has, you know, the ability to fight off the subadults, you know, or the more juvenile adult males. And that's not a, hey, let's do that and that'll fix it tomorrow. That's a long-term thing. So I don't think it's an either or, but everything's on the table at this point.
So, this is a Texas Park and Wildlife, like they, they're the decision maker. They're, in charge of wildlife. Are they providing any direction? Do they have any thoughts on it? Are they, obviously they're taking steps. They've put in this auodad chopper bill. I know that's not what it's called, but they're trying to take the steps to address the issue anyway.
Yeah, and like I said, on public lands, they've been hammering them for a while, doing crouch aerial gunning and foot surveys and killing, and they even, private landowners didn't come to them and said, hey, can I borrow one of those traps? Or hey, can you, if you're flying, because they contact the landowners and say, hey, we're going to be flying all around your property. Can we fly and remove auodad? And a bunch of them, most of them now are saying, yeah, have at it. Some of them are saying, nope, don't shoot any of them. And there's a fraction also that says, yeah, kill all those females you want, but don't shoot those big males. Those, because they're still selling those hunts to make money. And we understand that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do they? Are there any, like, what? How do they survive in Africa? Like, I think they're native to Africa, are they not?
Yes, they're up in the Ivory Coast in the very northern part of Africa in the Atlas Mountains. They're actually threatened or endangered there. So there's not very many over there. We've also tried to work out a student exchange program where we send them. No, I'm kidding. We don't. Send some over there, that would help. Another thing that happens is when some of these landowners will catch these auodad, they sell them to other states. So just a word of warning, if you want auodad, man, we will hook you up, but be careful what you ask for because you will be in the same problem before long.
Yeah, no doubt. Are there any other states that are having similar issues or at risk of this? I think there's a few populations on the West Coast. I think Oregon's maybe got some, California as well or something.
I've heard about that, and some people out there are wanting to let them expand, and some people are like, are you kidding me? Look what's going on in Texas. And then, New Mexico, they've always had some. In New Mexico, they're listed as a game species. And so they claim to not have the population densities that we do. But they're still there. And over in New Mexico.
So I've heard people say, is it worth it? Is it worth it to, they've been extirpated twice, desert bighorns. We're at risk again here. What's our answer for that?
Well, like I said, people just have to come with the realization and make your decision. Do you want desert bighorn sheep or do you want an invasive species from Africa?
What's the consensus in Texas? If you were to, I know there's been huge support for the Franklin Mountain transplant. You've been sharing videos with me from all the national news agencies. It's been widely covered and telling the success of it. Unfortunately, the auodad story is not getting out as well as it could. And of course, that's just like anything else, shutting down the grizzly bear hunt in BC. Nobody understands it. Nobody really gives a shit, to be honest. Right. So, what would you say the consensus is in Texas with the people that see, like, for example, Elephant Mountain or like in the Franklin Mountain, it's right in the city there. Are those people connected to the sheep and do they want to fight for them?
Oh, very much so. In fact, of anywhere in Texas, that little area that we put those sheep in, man, you talk about creating a public draw. When they started dropping those lambs and they would show up on cameras, they would post them like on the city social media. And then they had naming contests. And I mean, they were all in. And so of course, there's no auodad over there, but they are full on for the desert bighorn sheep in Texas. Before we put sheep over there, Parks and Wildlife and TBS had a series of 3 public outreach seminars So people could come, listen to the history of the sheep program, listen to what's going on, listen to the problem, see the numbers, and then they could ask as many or whatever questions they wanted. And all three of those were really well attended. In fact, I was kind of surprised at how many people were there, and then was really surprised when we rolled into the park with those trailers and there was 800 people there waiting to see them released.
That's amazing.
There was one whole line of press with TV and radio and newspaper and photographers, and I mean, it was crazy how many people were there.
Yeah.
So the Franklin Mountains, there's been huge buy-in there. Across the Trans-Pecos, people that have sheep, people that don't have sheep but want to protect the sheep, they've bought in. Some of the people that don't have sheep don't think they're anywhere where they're ever going to get sheep, but they have auodad, then they really don't care.
Right. Yeah.
So that group is, I don't know how big that group is, to be honest with you. But
right. Well, but if they don't care, then there's a difference between not caring and caring, in my opinion. And if we look at British Columbia, for example, I compare like multi-species from other jurisdictions. So if you look at BC, we got the caribou and wolves. So they're aerial gunning wolves in BC here. Very controversial. There's been lawsuits. The government stayed the course because it was those mountain caribou were at risk of extirpation, and so they've done the hard. But there've been people actively canvassing. Horse and burros in the U.S., same issue, right? There's a huge group of advocates for that. It's great for fundraising. And I'm sure they're passionate about the resource too. But it's certainly we see the wolves like it's just a moneymaker for anyone that's supporting that cause and trying to shut down. And it's like you said, do you want the caribou or do you want the wolf? Do you want do you want the horse and burros or do you want other animals on the landscape? So are we at risk with that at Aoudad? Is anyone going to say, oh, those are cute cuddly animals, we want to save them, or are we going to be okay?
As far as I'm aware, there's not like a Texas Aoudad Society like there's a Texas Bighorn Society. A lot of people say, and it's kind of a cultural thing, Kyle, and the culture shifted a little bit. Used to be like, oh, those are exotics, don't mess with those. Well, now there's so many of them and they're everywhere. Used to you would see generational photos of kids with their first whitetail or mule deer or pronghorn or whatever with their dad or their granddad or their mom or grandmom, or it was their daughter, and all those multiple generations. There's less and less of those pictures available, and more of it with the first animal that those kids are killing, their auodad.
Yeah.
The mule deer taking a big hit in the Trans-Pecos region as well, as you can imagine, with the habitat loss.
So do we have some allies there with the mule, like a MDF or someone else?
Yeah, Mule Deer Foundation has expressed some support, and they're working with Dr. French at Sul Ross, doing some things, some different studies, and then on getting some support. There's been support from a lot of other NGOs. We're just kind of waiting for that to all roll out officially.
Awesome. Yeah. So obviously like-minded organizations and building consensus for this. So what do you kind of see as next steps? Are we just sort of in a holding pattern, or is there more or aerial removal going on? What's sort of happening in the wings now with this stuff?
Yeah, the aerial moving thing's fixing to really go up a notch with the aerial gunning in those traps. Like I said, Parks and Wildlife have 2 traps and limited amount of funding for aerial gunning. They still can do it, but you can see the limitation there. So if you provide more support there, that'll help a lot.
Is money an issue? Is it or is it, like obviously it's expensive. Is this something that the state's investing in, or is it something that's going to have to come from private funding from NGOs like TBS, WSF, others?
Both. Some of the state does, like I said, they really hammer the aoudad on the public lands, on those WMAs. A lot of the private landowners spend a bunch of money doing it. Some of them spend what they can But then when the state's flying in an area adjacent to theirs, hey, can you come fly my place too? And so there's there's a lot of cooperation that way. And then private donations and NGOs kicking in a lot.
Awesome. What's the state for a future transplant? So let's say Franklin goes crazy and all of a sudden there's 200 sheep there and they're breeding again. Is there a place that you guys could do some aoudad removal and do a translocation, or not really? We're kind of restricted right now.
It's a great question. Actually, we just had the Texas has a Desert Bighorn Advisory Council. And so I'm on that. And so we had a meeting Wednesday and talked about all of this stuff. And this, all this stuff that I'm giving you is nothing new. It's been talked about at that symposium and talked about on that call. That research has been presented. But one of the things that came up as a priority is like, hey, what happens when Elephant Mountain reaches carrying capacity? What happens, like you said, if Franklin Mountain State Park, that population goes crazy? What do we do? And so they're looking at some kind of novel mountain ranges that are a little smaller, a little easier to control, and looking at the ones that have the lowest auodad density, and then going in there and doing their prep work to translocate sheep into there. So yeah, that's actually in the process, is to find some of those while we're knocking back big numbers, start with some of those areas that have low aoudad densities that are a little easier to manage and get down into manageable numbers or get rid of completely, and then put sheep in there.
Mm-hmm. I guess there's no way that we can incentivize landowners to have bighorns and sell bighorn hunts instead of freaking aoudad, eh?
Actually, that's happened too. The hunting permits in Texas, they do a survey, and then based on those survey results, if you're a private landowner and you have sheep, based on those survey results, that's how many tags you get.
Okay.
They haven't issued a tag in the last 2 years.
Right. Because of the population numbers. Yeah.
That's another thing that has been talked about at the state level, at the legislative level, is coming up with some sort of conservation easement or conservation tax break for some of these landowners. And like, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll get a tax break. Or like I said, areas with the lowest aoudad density, if that habitat is good, hey, we're thinking about we got some sheep, your place looks good. And then, then there's a checklist. Do you have habitat? Yes. Do you have water? Do you do predator control, or are there predators? Do you do aoudad control? And then the aoudad control, one of the things they were talking about is that needs to really be spelled out instead of, I do aoudad control. I sell about 10 hunts a year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Tongue in cheek, but sometimes that happens too.
Right.
But so incentivizing landowners through tax breaks, through, conservation easements, that sort of thing. That's all. Like I said, it's not just, well, let's try this and see. Nothing's off the table. Everything's being out there.
Well, I commend TBS for your leadership on this and not resting and just doing everything that you guys can within your power and bringing everyone else to the table on this issue and some leadership on it. Obviously, it's much needed. And if it wasn't for the leadership from you guys in Texas, it would be pretty scary.
Yeah, the scariest number to me, talk about all those, tons of forage loss and this and that. But, 4 years ago, 20 to 25,000 aoudad, 1,200 sheep. Today, 400-ish sheep and over 100,000 aoudad.
Yeah, so at 60% die off on the bighorns or 70% and 400% growth on the aoudads. So where does it look like in 10 years? Yeah, it's scary. And that's with removing, what did you say, 1,700 were removed at that one time?
Oh, on that one mountain range, they removed 3,000, what was it? 3,000 or excuse me, 5,773 aoudad, which was 73% of their population in 90 hours. And like I said, with
5,700. Wow.
100 aoudad back in there. And so they projected using that information that that range would be back to pre-treatment aoudad populations within 2.5 to 5 years.
Wow.
If you more remote.
Wow. That's crazy.
When you start looking at math with this, it's just kind of like, wow, pretty mind-boggling, actually.
It's pretty easy to get overwhelmed and sort of deflated if you think about it too hard, because it's just such almost an insurmountable issue, right? So,
Yes.
just out of curiosity, you mentioned peak was 1,200. Was there like a pre-war number that was higher than 1,200? Was there ever more than 1,200 in Texas, like sort of pre-Western civilization type thing, or?
But in the 1800s, it was estimated, 12. It depends on, there's a bunch of different numbers floating around out there. Kind of the more consistent are 12 to 1,500. Something I've read some that said 2,000 or 3,000, but I don't know if there was ever 3,000. There may have been. Like I said, I'm just not sure.
Right. Yeah.
One report and the more common reports are saying, about 1,500. And then they're down in that Trans-Pecos area where they were. And then around the turn of the century, that area started getting settled. And so they brought in railroads that cut up the habitat. They brought in domestic sheep that spread disease. And then there was unregulated hunting. And so that combination of three things led to the extirpation of them. And the last known ram was, around Van Horn, Texas. And they found it stuck in a fence, I think 1960, 61, 59, somewhere in there. And that was thought to be the last one.
Interesting. Wow. Well, a complex issue, Sam. Lots of moving parts. Anything our listeners can do?
On a Friday afternoon, huh?
Yeah. Well, I will say there's definitely some encouragement knowing that you guys are on this. I know the Wild Sheep Foundation is doing what we can to support TBS, and I think there's going to be a lot more on this aoudad issue in the next few months / years. And but is there any call to action or anything that we can ask our listeners to do to help out?
I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to all the chapters and affiliates that have called and talked to us and worked with us. And what can we do? How can we help? I mean, you've been in Wild Sheep Foundation longer than I have. So you see that family approach and it's like, oh, this family's having issues. We got to jump in there. And so thank you to all those chapter and affiliates that have kind of joined the effort, I guess, how to say it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. No, that's it's great, and I think there's going to be a lot more support moving forward, and a coalition of like-minded people that are going to step up and support you guys in any way, shape, or form. And but Sam, anything else? We missed anything? Have we not? Is there anything that we didn't talk about we need to address?
No, I think that's everything and then some.
Awesome, cool. Well, thank you for your leadership, both in Texas and then on our Wild Sheep Foundation board on this issue. You've elevated it. And I know that you've made our board very aware, and they're looking really closely at it. And I think there'll be a bunch of stuff coming out on that in the coming weeks here, on, trying to create more awareness around this issue and be more proactive and support Texas and try and deal with this issue. And like you said, Texas is the issue. That's the vector right now. But these other states aren't immune too. There's, Oregon, California, New Mexico. This is not a singular issue. It's not just Texas. Texas is the hot spot right now, but none of these other areas are immune to it either, right?
No, not immune at all. Yeah. Like I said, there's some states that actually have been buying aoudad to have. So, without naming states, calling them out on your podcast, it won't be long and they'll be in the same situation we're in.
Yeah, fair. Well, Sam, thank you so much. I guess anyone that wants to support the cause, get over to Texas Bighorn Society. I know you guys are pretty easy to find on the World Wide Web. I'm a life member, and I'm sure proud to be part of your organization and grateful for all the hard work that you guys are doing. So thank you to Clay and yourself and the entire board of directors and all your volunteers back there in Texas. Appreciate you.
We've got a good, strong board of directors, and now that Clay's president, I think there couldn't be a better person to step in anytime, but especially when you're starting to have these numbers that we're having with the die-off, because he brought them back once or twice, so it's nothing. He's all in.
Clearly passionate. Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well, sir, appreciate you. Thank you so much. Enjoy having you on the podcast. It's always fun to catch up, and hopefully we have you back in a couple of years when we talk about the great rebound that we've had with bighorn sheep on the mountains in Texas, and how we've got the aoudad issue sorted. But I won't hold my breath.
That speaking of the numbers, that Franklin Mountains where we put 77 sheep over there. Right now we have 95, 98, something like that. And since the translocation, we've only had 6 mortalities. We had one that there's one part of that park that's called the Kasner Range, and there's no access to that because that's part of the Department of Defense. And so they think what happened was one of those sheep got down on one of those lower flats. I mean, because they have roads all the way up there, and got hit by a car or a truck.
Man, sheep just love to die, eh? They just I guess we should all pick aoudad when we decide to support a species, because I guess they don't need the help. Oh goodness. Yeah. No, it's awesome. Well, and it's, that's where, we've got dedicated volunteers and individuals and organization and other entities too, but certainly Texas Bighorn Society, and you guys are so passionate and doing everything you can. And like the hard work the agency's doing, like you said, Clay Brewer has brought that population back twice, and he's going to do it again. So we're going to hold him accountable as the president of TBS for that. So awesome. Thanks so much, Sam. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Kyle.